Hello, my name is Charli Wall, and I'm joined by the wonderful Dr. Bill Petitt, who is a board-certified psychiatrist who resides in America. And he is, I would say, an excellent sharer of the understanding that I teach, which is called Innate Health or the Three Principles. He's been a student since 1983 under Sydney Banks. I'm really honoured to bring you on. So welcome, Bill. Thank you for coming.
No, thank you. Thank you.
The topic of my podcast and where I like to start is it's called Courage, Dear Heart. And the reason I called it that is because I think everyone has courage. Everyone shows courage. And I wondered firstly, if you could answer this, what courage means for you.
Well, you know, of course, it's interesting, doesn't it come from the Latin and French heart, right? And I think of my late wife, she wrote a little book of poetry called Coming Home Poetry. And her name was Sue Pettit. And it just reminds me, as you said that, Charli, this wasn't planned, but here's what she said. She said, the 8 lines: coming home to peace and quiet, coming home to feelings warm, coming home where there's a fullness, where love in me is born. Coming home's a simple journey. It takes no movement on my part. Instead of listening to my thoughts, I listen with my heart. So in a way, to me, the real meaning of courage is when we're willing to allow our mind to quiet to where we listen from our heart instead of listening to our thoughts. So people say to me, you know, that for the last 37 years, and I stopped practicing clinical psychiatry in December of last year. I'm 77 and a half. I feel younger inside than I did when I was 40 in my heart. And I know that I probably wouldn't be alive if I hadn't learned what I learned. Because I would have stressed myself out to the point that it would have had physical manifestations, and I doubt if I would be alive. But I think people, and for the 36 years until last December, I practiced psychiatry I knew medicines. I know medicines. I know them well. I taught in a university medical school. I taught psychiatric residents medicines, how to use them correctly. But I did start to see that they were only, if somebody was so anxious that they were having panic attacks, then until they learned how not to innocently create those, then they might need some medicine to help them listen. And so the medicines became something that I used to create a window of opportunity to teach people how to access their innate, inborn, complete mental well-being that every human being has. So I really believe that nobody is broken and nobody is lacking. Inside of everybody is pure spiritual wisdom. And so people say to me that it must have taken a lot of courage for you to turn away from your training to stand by this. And I guess to me, it would have taken courage not to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because once you know something, you know it. Once a child understands gravity enough that they don't need a sippy cup, it doesn't take courage for them to put their glass on the table instead of letting go of it all over the floor. It's just that you understand how the system works now. And some of the most courageous people that I know are psychiatrists that don't understand what I know. Because to me, it would take courage every day to go to sit with people and not know that they're perfectly mentally healthy, and that all I have to do is to help them unwrap the beautiful present that they have inside of them.
So how would you, so my audience is fairly new to this understanding, and I'd really love for you to either share a snippet of the insight that you had about how people have, you know, that got that innate well-being, or
Right.
and could you share your understanding of the three principles, please?
Sure. I could do both of those. And I think part of it would be for me to tell my story a little bit, and then to share the insights that I started to have.
That would be great.
And it was 1983. It was April Fool's Day. I guess they have April Fool's Day in England.
They
too.
do. They do. And I meant to say that in the beginning, that it was April Fool's Day.
It was April Fool's Day, 1983, and I was 41 years old, and I had 26 and a half years of formal education, and I had been in psychiatry about 9 years. I'd been out of medical school 14 years, since 1969. I recently went to my 50-year reunion from medical school.
Wow.
The good thing we had name tags, because I had a number of those people I had not seen for 50 years, half a century. Amazing, right?
That is amazing.
Amazing. So I had met Dr. George Pransky in January of 1983, and he told me, because I'd heard about Dr. Pransky, that this was in Oakland, California. I was working out of San Rafael, California, and I had left psychiatry because I didn't see people getting really healed. I saw people getting some relief from their pain, but I did not see people getting healed. And so I had heard that Dr. Pransky was people were being referred to him that other people had given up hope on, and that more often than not, people were finding their mental well-being and having a really nice life, and that was really unique from my experience. And I myself had been going in and out of clinical depression for 21 years. I had seen 6 different psychiatrists, and they were good people, Charli. They were good people. I would never knock psychiatry, because generally my experience is they're people who have wanted to be a healer, wanted to help people. I mean, the psychiatrist, the Greek roots of psychiatrist, I've always been rather mischievous, and that's why I got spanked as a child. I wasn't physically abused. I earned every one of them. But and my brother, who never got spanked, at family reunions, people always ask him, "Why did you never get spanked, and Bill got spanked many, many, many times?" He said it was very simple. I watched what Bill did, and I didn't do it. Right. So I've always been a little mischievous, and in doing that sidetrack, I got lost. But so anyway, I listened to to Dr. Pransky, and he wasn't a doctor at the time, but he later got his PhD, and I didn't know for sure what he was talking about, but there was a place inside of me that resonated as true. So he told me that this man who was his teacher was coming to town, and that he was going to be talking to over 200 people in San Francisco for a Friday evening and a Saturday and a Sunday. And would I come? And so I thought, well, you know, there's something here, and I haven't known how to find real peace of mind. You know, I had a family history of depression, even of suicide on both sides of the family history of alcoholism on both sides of the family. And so if genes were going to be my destiny, I was screwed, you know. And there was, I had a glimpse that Dr. Pransky knew something that I didn't know. And if this was his teacher, I thought, what do I have to lose to go listen? So there it was, April Fool's Day, 1983. And I'm sitting there, 41 years old, with 26 and a half years of formal education, over 900 lectures, 800 to 900 lectures on mental illness and medications to relieve the pains of mental illness. And and uh, and I'd never been hospitalized. I had been suicidal at times, where I came very close to doing something impulsively to take my life, because the internal pain that I was experiencing, that I had no idea that I was creating. It appeared to me that the pain was being created by things external to me,
Yeah.
some of which had already happened in the past and I couldn't be undone, and some of which were happening now. And but I somehow made it through those with the help of caring psychiatrists. And medicines had never truly seemed to help that much. But so I'm sitting there with all of this in my past, and as I listened to this welder with a ninth grade education, within 15 minutes, I knew that he knew 1,000 times more about mental health than I did. And that was humbling. It was very humbling, but at the same time, Charlie, it was incredibly hopeful.
Yeah.
It was incredibly hopeful because I I had always thought that my depression was something that I had no control over, that just came and got me when it wanted to. I used to have the feeling, even when I wasn't depressed, that depression was like a big black cloud walking about 3 steps behind me, saying, "Listen, Pettit, don't get too cocky, because I can have your ass anytime I want it. Anytime I want it."
So
What a
you were
scary,
always in fear.
what a scary way to go through life.
Mm.
And if I think it's caused by things external to me, to some degree, I was in constant apprehension of what was going to happen next in life that might throw me down into another depression.
So was it when you heard Sid speak for the first time, and given that that was your background and your background in psychiatry, was it in how he said it? Was it the feeling that you got? What was it what gave you hope?
It's a good question, Charlie. I'm going to put a plug in here because uh, at www.sidbanks.com, there's free videos. Sid's videos are there at no cost. My friend Shane Kennedy, who's the CEO of Lone Pine, has made those available around the world for free. And you go and there's watch, listen, and read. And the first, we finally talked Sid into being videotaped 27 years after he had had the experience. 27 years after he had had the experience. And and because he didn't want followers. Some people, when they hear something like a welder with a ninth grade education, and they've got people all around the world now. There was 40 countries, I think, represented at the online and in person at the conference in England last June, 10th conference. It sounds cultish,
Yeah,
but
I've
Sid,
heard that a lot.
yeah, but Sid was the furthest thing. He said, "Listen," he said, he refused to be videotaped for 27 years because he didn't want followers. He said, I will talk to clergy. I will talk to mental health professionals. I'll talk to doctors, talk to educators, but I don't want followers." He said, "I don't know why this happened to me, why I was allowed to see this. And we used to say, finally, we said, Sid, you're going to die one of these days. You're 70 years old in 2000. He died in 2009. We said, we need to have a record. There was audio tapes, but we need to have videotapes. There's something deeper about seeing somebody totally calm, just talking from their heart.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he finally agreed to do it. Um, so as I sat there, I don't know. I know that if indeed, when he said that that mental well-being is at the core of every human being's being as a human being, that at the core we're made of the energy of the universe, the same energy, that the intelligent energy that's behind a tree growing and a plant growing and a sperm and an egg coming together and creating a human being. There's some intelligent energy behind life, and we are really a manifestation of that energy. Uh, and we have that intelligence at our beck and call, our beckon resource every moment of our life, guiding us if we can allow our personal mind to quiet down enough to hear it. Well, as he's taught, it's something about that. It wasn't that I believed him. It was that there was a place inside of me that knew what he was pointing to was true. And that's different. You know, one of the first things Mr. Banks will say on the first Long Beach video, The Great Illusion, he says, please do not believe anything that I say. Now, I don't know what cult leader has ever said, don't believe what I say. He said, because if you do, if you believe it just because I say it, you've become a follower. And you've given up your right to think for yourself, which every human being has. We've got a free will. But there's a difference between being a follower and being a listener. If you just listen, if you're willing to listen with an open mind, to see something beyond what you have in your computer brain already, you'll know when you hear truth. You'll know when you hear truth. We all know. I kiddingly say that I think we've got a little truth meter inside. And on one end of it, it has, when I'm being nice, I say nonsense. When I'm not being nice, I say bullshit. Is at one end. So whatever one doesn't offend you, you can say it. And at the other end is truth. And even if we don't understand cognitively what people are saying, if we listen with a quiet mind, in my experience, I think we know when we're hearing truth. And we know when we're hearing bullshit. And so all Sid asked in his videos is, all I'm asking you to do is listen quietly. Because if you hear something that resonates from your own wisdom that's at the core of your being, then it's yours. It's not because you're believing somebody else. So that's what happened. I think as I listened, that it happened to some degree, even as I sat with Dr. Pransky. If you would have been waiting for me at the drugstore or at the coffee shop after I met with Dr. Pransky the first time for 2 hours, and you would have said, Bill, is this truly a breakthrough in mental health and equivalent to Einstein's breakthrough in physics, relativity? I said, I think it is. But I can't tell you what it is. It has something to do with the fact that we are using a power of thought to create our experience every moment of our life from the inside out. I think I got a glimpse of that. And I said, I don't know if I really see that now, but I think they're pointing in the direction that it has something to do with that we're using a gift of a spiritual gift that has no form to navigate our way through life. And I also felt that he was pointing to the idea that we had access to a wisdom that was beyond our intellect. And I think I thought of times in my life where I had enough sense not to act when I didn't know what I was doing, and maybe took a nap or that saying people say, well, sometimes I just know to sleep on it. Do you lose me when that comes to you?
No, but it will come through on
Yeah,
the.
well, let me at least put it to where.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry. It's
no,
fine.
they're fun. They're people asking for money.
Oh.
So anyway, I don't know. I think I just as he talked, I just listened quietly.
Mm.
And I had people. I remember this one lady that came into the hospital on a Friday and left on a Monday. She was 48 years old. She came in on Friday. She was so depressed that she wasn't suicidal, but she wasn't eating, she wasn't bathing. She was going to die not from not taking care of herself.
Mm.
72 hours later, she left radiant. She looked 5 to 8 years younger. She looked me in the eye and she said, "You're never going to have to see me again."
Wow.
And I said, "What was it?" And she said, "Well, I've enjoyed talking to you because I spent, after the initial admission on Friday, on Saturday and Sunday, I spent 15 or 20 minutes with her. And she said, I really enjoyed talking to you, but you asked me to watch that set of 4 videos, the Long Beach videos, twice, which was 4.5 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes. She said, and you told me that the second time through, I'd have different eyes and ears than the first time. And she said, you know what? Somewhere while I was listening to those videos, I felt a calm and a peace and a quiet and a place of love and joy that I had not visited for any length of time since I was a small child.
Oh my gosh.
And I never had to see her again. And she said, doctor, I should probably tell you something. And I said, what's that, Betty? I said, you look radiant. I said, you look 5 to 8 years younger than when you walked in here. And her life circumstances were still the same. But I heard later that her sons, who were getting in trouble with the law and everything, just because of her mental well-being and her responsiveness and her wisdom, they started changing because of the love that she now lived in, the feeling of love from the heart. She spoke from the heart. I said, what is it that you wanted to tell me? She said, well, those videos? I said, yeah. She said, I did not understand one word that man said. Not one word.
But she felt something.
She felt something. She was touched. Her place of mental well-being and wisdom, in a way, the fact that she didn't have an IQ of 165 helped her because she didn't try to analyze it. Instead, she really took my advice and listened quietly to be impacted. And she saw beyond the words. Where Sid says, don't listen to the word. My words are like a finger. I'm trying to point to something. If you and I were walking through dusk or a light fog and suddenly you saw a windmill and you said, Bill, look at the windmill. And I looked around, I said, I don't see any windmill, Charlie. And then you pointed to where you saw the windmill. If I kept looking at your finger, I would not see the windmill. I'd have to look beyond your finger to what you were pointing to see, oh, now I see it.
That's a great analogy, I think, because when I talk about it from, I can only talk about it from what I've seen. And my sense from others is that they really, and this was me too, right? Then they're really caught up in their intellect. And how would you point someone to the windmill rather than your finger?
Well, I'll point just the way I've been talking, and I'll be glad to share about the way I see the principles. But I encourage people to, there's the videos. I tell people if they want to get some feel for this, to get as quiet as they can and to go to that website that I just mentioned, www.sidbanks.com, and watch the first 16 minutes. They're in sections. They're only 3 30-minute ones or 30 to 33-minute, and then 1 44-minute. Watch the first section of the first tape. It's 16 and a half minutes. I say that's all I'm asking for, is 16 and a half minutes of your life. If after the quietly listening, and I'm going to ask you not to try to listen to try to find something that you don't think is true, but to listen just openly, to be impacted, to see if that place doesn't get touched where you hear truth, you know it. I said, if after the 16 and a half minutes you have no interest in ever listening to or reading anything this man has to say, then I would say for right now, that's not where you are. And that's fine. That really is fine. Now, I have the vast majority of people go, I ended up watching the whole four videos, and I'm watching them again over the weekend, this coming weekend when I've got time. Now, but other people will occasionally say, but even them, I hear later, they say, about 2 months later, when I was still struggling, I thought, what do I have to lose? Why don't I go back and listen to that man? Because there was something that it bothered me that he was so certain. Right? And then people used to say that to Sid. They'd say, it bothers me that you're so certain that you say that you know. He'd say, well, would it be better if I didn't think I knew what I was talking? I wasn't sure of what I was. When you go to learn about something, you want to go to somebody who has certain that they know the material that they're talking about, what they're talking
Absolutely. Yes. And you get that sense in The Enlightened Gardener, don't you?
You get it from The Enlightened Gardener. I love Second Chance and Quest of the Pearl.
Me too. Yeah.
They're very all of them are. Dear Liza, even though it never mentions the principles, the feeling in that Dear Liza is so powerful. Dear Liza is like 88 pages, right? And it's about that little girl living in London in 1834 who has nothing and yet joy. She has full of joy.
Yeah.
And I read that with a man in a state hospital that had over 60 hospital admissions to the state hospital. 60. He was about 58 years old, and the last 40 years since he turned 18, after being terribly abused physically and sexually as a youngster, he had turned violent, he had suicide attempts, he had whatever. And I sat with him one day and I read through Dear Liza over 2 or 3 days because it's only 88 pages. And he started sobbing uncontrollably at some point, just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And I just sat with him, and I might have put a little box of tissue within arm's length, and then I just sat with him as one human being with another that knows what it's like to suffer in my soul, And when he finally stopped, he looked at me and he said, Dr. Pettit, he said, these tears are not tears of sadness. They're tears of having my heart open and being touched for the first time since I was 6 years old. He was not hospitalized again while I was there. It was only 4 or 5 months. It used to be that he was in every 3 weeks for years and years. So I point people towards, people want to say things. They say, "Oh, Dr. Pettit, he heals people." Well, I don't heal people. There is a healing power that was within us that Mr. Banks pointed to as powerfully and as directly as anybody I know. And when people access that, they heal. Doctors do not heal broken bones. We know that. They put them in a cast and they tell you don't walk on them. And 6 weeks later, the bone's healed. And the doctor didn't heal it. He got the hell out of the way of it and didn't. If the doctor would have come, well, we have to check every 2 days to see if it's healed yet, that bone would be broken 40 years later. So the healing is within all of us. And I know it's beyond our talk today, but one of the big things today is trauma sensitization, trauma embedding, trauma sensitivity, trauma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I can tell you over the last 37 years how many people from war, from rape, from molestation, from physical abuse, from emotional abuse, found a level of peace that they never thought was possible, and a healing allowed the healing to fully to fully occur. There's a small study that needs to be replicated out of a university, a little college here in the United States, and they measured 134 people's adverse childhood events. That's a big thing, the ACEs. And if you have more than 6 ACEs, your chances of dying, literally physically, your mortality is 18 to 20 years earlier than your peers.
Wow.
And it's 6 out of 10. If you have at least 6 out of 10 of these adverse childhood events, whether it's a death of a parent early or physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, etc. And so people start to believe that trauma has power to damage the brain, and it doesn't. The middleman is thought. And in this one study, the people that had the same the people who had scored also in the highest, I don't know whether it was the highest 10% or 20% in forgiveness of self and forgiveness of others, it totally zeroed out the effect of adverse childhood events.
Wow, that's huge.
Totally zeroed it out. So some people would listen to that, Francis, and they would hear, oh, I see, you're telling me I should forgive myself and I should forgive the person that terribly abused me. The principles, and I'm going to talk to them, but I want to give you a chance to talk first because I see that you were about to say something. They're not prescriptive. They're not telling you what to do. They're letting you know how the system works and what the system is so you can take full advantage of it. So as people have a deeper and deeper understanding of the principles, they truly do forgive themselves and they forgive others because they see what I'm going to call psychological innocence. They see that given the level of understanding that people are at every moment of their life, they do the best that they see capable of doing at that moment, or they would have done better. I'm not going to speak for you, but I certainly did things that later I said, what the hell was I thinking?
Oh, gosh, yes.
And I think everybody has. But if we see psychological innocence, if we see that we did the best we knew at the time, it doesn't mean that there aren't consequences to that. But it means that we don't have to carry that as a burden. We can learn from it and go forward. And anybody that burdens themselves with guilt or resentment lowers their feeling level and is more apt to have more difficulties because they're distancing themselves from their own innate wisdom. One of the wonderful little books, as you know, of Mr. Banks's 6 books, 5 of them are novelettes. They teach through a story. The one that doesn't is called The Missing Link. And as you know, it's got spaces. It's so powerful, it's got spaces in between because there's no way you could read it as prose.
Yeah.
And on the chapter on love and forgiveness, the very first lines, I think, are on one of the pages are, judging your own faults or the faults of others leads to unhappiness. Now, he's not saying it's bad or evil. It's just saying, don't be surprised when you feel unhappy.
And a lot of people live in that, don't they? They live in either, self-judgment or sort of pain from reliving trauma.
Right. And judging, having angry, resentful thoughts towards people that they feel have injured them, right? And I tell people, if you start to see, because when I had a moment of insight that allowed me to go to forgiveness, I was the one that got out of prison emotionally. I was the one. It wasn't that I let somebody else out of prison, because they might still be walking around in guilt for what they've done or not or whatever. And a lot of forgiveness releases you from mental anguish and pain and all the horrible negative feelings an unforgiving mind experiences. When you learn to forgive, you see with clarity the ignorance and the innocence of those who trespass against you. You realize that hanging on to old grudges is like a miser in deep water, clutching at a bag of fool's gold, unaware that the fool's gold is just heavy, useless rocks weighing him down. And I tell people, because I see a lot of people that say, God, I'd like to forgive myself, but I can't. I just can't forgive myself for what I did. Da, 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 da. Or I'd like to forgive that person, but I'm never going to. Or, I want peace of mind, but I'm never going to forgive that son of a bitch for what he did to me or she did to me. Well, lots of luck on finding peace of mind. And I've never seen anybody on their deathbed that was really happy that they died righteously miserable.
Me either, and
Huh?
I was going to say I was a nurse, so I never heard that either.
Yeah. And I tell people, if you really see that you want to be at peace and you want to find forgiveness in your heart, if you see that, even if you don't know how to get there, if you see that you want that because you want your heart once again to be filled with love and joy, to be able to receive and give love, and you want once again to be able to have your mind quiet enough that you can access the God-given gifts that you've been given to make a difference in the world or to touch people in a loving way, and you see that your lack of forgiveness of self or others is inhibiting you from being able to do that. In fact, it's making every day of life a struggle. If you see clearly that that's what you want, you will, and you allow your mind to quiet enough to listen, you will be guided, and you will wake up one morning with forgiveness in your heart. And it won't be because of effort you've made. It'll be because you just clearly got quiet enough to listen. So do you want me to, and let me let you talk, but do you want me then to talk a little bit about the three principles? I'm sure people are saying, why is he hiding the cheese right now? Go ahead.
No, I was just deeply listening then. I think just personally, hearing you speak about self-forgiveness, forgiveness of others, more self-forgiveness, that spoke to my heart. So yeah, I was just deeply listening, and I would absolutely love for you to talk, to what the principles are, for my audience who might be like, they might be hearing something or sensing something, but not necessarily knowing. So I'd love it if you could speak to that, please.
Okay. Well, I'm going to speak to him, and the three principles that Mr. Banks says that they're universal principles, and meaning that there's no exceptions. In every field before, we've had localized principles, and when those principles became known, those laws and I'm not talking about principles like good ideas, like the 10 principles of wood chopping or the 10 principles of marathon running or training. These are good ideas, but principles from the that are obvious truths, or they're laws that are built into the universe that explain how things work. So that whenever principles are seen about something, things that were not understandable before become understandable. For me as a physician, it's amazing that until in England, Dr. Harvey, and I can't say his first name right now, in 1728, which is less than 300 years ago, he discovered the principles of circulation in the body, of how the heart has oxygenated blood the heart beats, and the left side of the heart sends out blood to the heart through the coronary arteries, to our leg muscles, our brain, everywhere, giving it oxygen so that it can continue to be alive, right?
Yeah.
Now, then it goes through, was a mystery. There's little capillaries, there's little things that 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 carry the blood that now has oxygen taken out of it through these little capillaries over to things we call veins. You can see them. You can see them in the top of your hand, right? They're bluish. They're not red. If you cut your radial artery, red blood spurts out. But if you cut this here, it doesn't spurt out. It just kind of leaks out, and it's kind of bluish because it doesn't have oxygen anymore. And that goes through the venous system back to the right side of the heart. And when the heart beats, the right side of the heart sends that blood into the lungs where it gets oxygen again. And then it goes into the left heart and goes out to the body. Well, that was not discovered until 1728, less than 300 years ago. And once that was known, it changed. It really started making medicine more of a science, because you really understood. Like, whenever people were in shock, what they used to do is they used to take blood. They'd bloodlet them. Mm. Now, if they were in heart failure and the heart couldn't handle the volume of blood, taking blood off lightened the load on the heart, and the person got better. However, if they were in septic shock, what we call in infection, the worst thing you could do is take volume away, then, right? Or if the person had an injury where it didn't have enough volume, there were times that they did that even when people had been injured. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So I guess my point is that until principles are understood, it's kind of there's 200 until people found out that syphilis there was this thing that caused syphilis, and there was a medicine, penicillin, that killed off the syphilis. Before that, there were 50 cures for syphilis, none of which worked very well, because you didn't understand the cause. And so if you really understand the cause, then you can see what the cure is.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the last 35 years, I've been trying to tell people that there's one cause of all mental illness, and it's lack of understanding of these three principles that I'm going to talk about, that we use to create our experience. And because of not understanding that, we get caught up in an outside-in world where we get caught up in our thinking, and we literally create a state of chronic mental stress. Some people 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day. And they've had studies for the last 35 years that shows that when you hook up people and you ask people that are pretty mentally healthy, you ask them for 3 minutes to purposely think about something negative, like when their dog died when they were 9, or when their grandmother died, or whatever comes to them, but purposely for 3 minutes think upsetting thoughts about something, and you've got a PET scan or an fMRI attached. Every single person in 35 years of variations of that has created a biochemical imbalance, neurotransmitter changes in 3 minutes of upsetting thinking.
Gosh. So imagine if they're doing that, which I was actually.
10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. Through worry, guilt, resentment, upset, overanalysis, unresolved grief, constantly being driven, trying to prove themselves, constantly living in a state of fear, of thinking that creates fear. to the degree that that's true, then a person is literally creating a biochemical dysregulation, neurotransmitters, even cell death, even affecting circuitry in the brain. And things that we call psychiatric symptoms are really, they're really love letters. They're trying to let us know that we're looking in the wrong direction. If you as a woman saw a friend of yours who was, I just talked to somebody earlier, he's 6'6" and 240 pounds, right? If you, and he was, even if he wasn't a friend of yours, just because of human beings, we get to, if you saw that he was running, he was looking at something and he was running into the street, and you saw that the bus that was coming was 95, he was going to get killed. He just didn't see where he was going. Even as a woman, nowhere comparing your size to his, I suspect that your heart would be touched. You talked about courage. You would go from the heart and you would throw your body into his legs in hope of knocking him to the ground, even if he broke his wrist or broke his humerus in the fall. You would have saved him from being killed. So also, when we start to use these beautiful gifts of mind, thought, and consciousness that I will get to here, I'm getting to.
I think you're doing it beautifully.
I'm talking about them, but I'll be more clear. But if I don't understand how that works, and I'm using them in a way that's creating pain and dysregulation, then what a loving thing to do that I have signals that let me know that I'm doing that. My mood will go down. I'll start to feel somewhat depressed. My anxiety level will go up. I'll start to feel anxious. My physical body will start to have discomfort somewhere. It lowers our pain threshold. There's a whole feedback mechanism, the microbiota in our bowel, back to the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary axis, and it lowers our pain threshold. That's what happens with people with fibromyalgia. The pain that they're feeling is very real, but they don't know it's an alarm system to leave their thinking alone and access their mental well-being. What's the fourth one? Thought. We've got at least these 4 levels of love letters that we're receiving to let us know that we're going in the wrong direction. We're misusing these incredibly beautiful gifts. So our thoughts will start becoming jumbled. We'll feel confused. We'll not be able to think as clearly. That's a gift. It's letting you know that you're going the wrong way. It's like signs that say one-way street ahead and you're going the wrong way. You're going to have cars coming at you really quick. So what are these 3 principles?
Yes, please.
I'm going to talk about them first in a personal way for our personal experience, and then I'm going to talk about them in a universal way. So the idea that universal mind, the way we experience it as human beings, I'm going to make the bold statement that the only way anything we experience is a thought-created experience. And people will say, wait a minute, what about our senses, right? What about touch and what about pain, right? Now, if this wasn't true, in many cultures, they literally can do C-sections under hypnosis. You're cutting through a woman's entire abdomen, cutting through her uterus, pulling a baby out, sewing it up. Why? Because their thinking is, you've been able to redirect their consciousness and their thought in a different direction. Okay, I'll make it more simple. It could be man or woman. Stumbles out of a serious car accident, kind of dazed, gets out of the car, even sees some smoke and maybe something coming from the front of the car, and suddenly remembers, even though they're kind of dazed and injured, that they have an 18-month-old little baby boy or girl in the back seat.
Yeah.
They go back to the car and they do those it takes, it takes, to me, it's difficult getting all those little things undone to get the child out. They finally take the little 18-month-old, they stumble out, people have started to gather, and they hand the baby over to somebody to safety, and then they feel excruciating pain as they look down and realize they've got bones sticking out of both of their arms from comminuted fractures. They did not experience any pain when their total focus of thought was in saving that infant in the back seat of that car that might explode any moment.
Yeah.
So universal mind is an idea that the brain is a computer, our mind is spiritual. The brain, Mr. Banks says it in The Missing Link. He says, many people think that the brain and the mind are the same thing, but some people believe the brain and the mind are the same. There has to be a power behind the brain to make it function. The brain and the mind are two entirely different things. The brain is biological, the mind is spiritual. The brain acts like a computer. Whatever you put into it is all you get out. That is simple logic. I often tell people, Francis, that Charli, yeah. I often tell people, Charli, that when I die, and at 77 and a half, it's likely to happen sometime in the relative near future, that, and by the way, that's fine. I mean, I've been, it's fine because I know in my heart that it's fine. Yeah. But anyway, so once you have no fear of death, you are free to live life fully. Sadly, some people live in fear of dying until they die and have missed incredible enjoyment of life. So, where was I here? So, remember where I was? Sorry.
Well, you were talking about the brain being like biological, the mind spiritual.
Right. So what I say is when I die, somebody might be walking around with a little white box, and you say, "What's in the box?" And you say, "Oh, it's Dr. Petitt's brain." He had a really quirky sense of humor, and we're going to find out what the hell it was about. Well, that's fine, but nobody's going to be walking around with a little white box that says Dr. Petitt's mind.
Because that's your soul.
That's the soul. When I die, at that moment, I don't weigh any less than I weighed 2 seconds before. But there's something that's not there, and it's vital to every organ in my body.
Yeah, so
that's mind. Mind is our connection to the source of life. You and I know, Charli, when a plant is dead, and we know when it's alive.
Yes.
I'm talking about a plant. There's something missing now. We know when a bird is dead and when a bird is alive. There's something missing. They're not connected to the source, which I'm going to call universal mind, which is the intelligent energy of all things. Even Einstein and David Bohm, the famous quantum, they all say the entire universe is the same energy. There is no difference. It's all in a different disguise. This glass is God energy. This book is God energy. There's nothing that's separate from the source. It can't be. But the difference between, as far as I know, between this glass and this book and me is that I can know what I am. I don't know that the book can know that it's divine energy in a form. We've been given the gift of consciousness, the gift of awareness that allows us to be aware. The divine passes from the formless to the form, and as human beings, we are both spectators and participants in this spiritual theater called life. So this is a participant. There's, as from what physicists tell me, there's atoms that have that have electrons going 3/4 the speed of light. It's pretty damn fast. Around every atom in this glass, in this book. This is energy. This is incredible energy. But you and I can be both participants, like the glass in the book, but we can be spectators. We can come to see what we're made of, and that we have access to the intelligence behind all of life. That's a game changer. He says the great mystics of the world who tried to explain such knowledge had no choice but to speak in metaphors, knowing that their words were only a representation of the spiritual wisdom. Spiritual meaning not religion, not dogma, formless. Spiritual means formless. It has no form. The power of thought, the power of mind, you can't measure it. You can't put it in a box. Power of consciousness. They're formless. They have no form, but they're real. Or you and I wouldn't be talking if we didn't have a mind and we didn't have consciousness to be aware. And the power of thought is formless. It's what we use to create form. It's what we use to create ideas. But the power of thought has no form. It's a power. Knowing their words were only a representation of the spiritual wisdom that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. So when I sit with people who really think that they're broken and that they're deficient and they're mentally ill and they have no, I say, oh, let's say their name was John Smith. I'm just going to pick it. And I say, oh, John, gosh, I never noticed this asterisk here in my book. It's been there all along. The representation of the spiritual wisdom that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. And then there's a little asterisk. It says, except for John Smith. Oh my gosh, John, you're special. You are really special. You're the exception. Oh, I didn't realize you were that special. I guess there's no reason for us to continue to talk since you don't have the spiritual wisdom that everybody else has. Well, they start laughing like you are. All human psyches. And by the way, psyche means the soul or the spiritual. That's why psychopathology, that some people in 3 principles, they get turned off by that word psychopathology. By the Greek root, it means the study of a suffering soul.
Oh. We lost that, didn't we? We lost that somewhere.
We lost the suffering, the study of a suffering soul, of a suffering mind, of a person whose that formless energy, essence of life is suffering innocently, innocently. All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any other's. Wow. You mean people on the back wards of the psychiatric units? Absolutely. I'm sure you've heard my story of Herb. 47 years with chronic schizophrenia, 47 years in a state hospital, and he started laughing. And when he finally stopped laughing, I said, Herb, what is so funny? He said, I've realized that I've been making myself crazy for 47 years with my own thinking.
That's an incredible story.
And I don't have to do it anymore. Charlie, he saw more than I did. He jumped ahead. I saw that I was making myself depressed, and I saw that wakened hope that maybe I'd be able to stop doing this to myself. But I didn't see what Herb saw that moment, that I didn't have to do it anymore. I saw that there was a possibility that I could have an insight that would allow me to stop doing it.
Yeah, me too.
All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any other's. Wow. only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. And exploring these principles, to me, is what has been the most reliable way to bring people back home to themselves. Now, people have found that place long before Sid Banks came along. Viktor Frankl, 3.5 years in a death camp, when he got out of that, he should have died about 25 years earlier than his peers from heart disease or infection or something from the chronic mental stress. Instead, he lived to be 92 and he wrote 16 books.
It's amazing, yeah.
Either he's, or Gandhi, or Mandela, who 27 years of prison, hard labor, and when he becomes president, some of the young blacks say, now we're going to show Whitey what it's like to be oppressed. And he said, no, we're not. We're going to show the white person what it means to be a true human being. Now, you can either say that those people are exceptions to the rule, or you can say, gee, I wonder if they're the rule in action. There's a
courage in action.
Yeah. Yeah. So mind is the intelligent energy of all things, whether in form or formless. Consciousness is the gift of awareness. It's what allows us to experience our thinking as real. And thought is the power that we have to navigate our way through life, this spiritual experience theater called life. And every single human being is using the power of thought in its own unique way. That was an eye-opener for me. I always thought when my late wife, luckily we had 18 years after that we learned the principles to really love and grow and with respect for each other before she passed away in 2000. But the first 10 years of our marriage, whenever we saw things differently, it was something to argue about. Who was right? I had no idea that she was experiencing a substantially different world than I was. And once we started to get a glimpse of the principles, I became very interested in listening from the heart, again, courage, from the heart, to try to understand a little bit of the world that she lived in. And once I did, she also became interested in understanding the world that I lived that was very different from the world she lived in. There are over 7 billion people on this planet. No two people are experiencing this world in the same way. And not only that, Bill Pettit, what I started to see when I lose my bearings, when I lose my love and lightheartedness, my eyeballs change. Things look different when I'm in a low mood than they do when I'm in a loving feeling.
Yes.
My late wife wrote this book of poetry that, by the way, is on Amazon. She wrote 65 pages of rhymed poetry in iambic pentameter over a weekend after we adopted our third child. She was so filled with gratitude. Sue Pettit, Coming Home Poetry. Here's one of the things in here besides the one that I just read. And I often, again, my mischievousness, I sometimes say, Charli, I say, oh, you can ignore this first line. I think she really didn't mean to say what she said. And then I say, well, really, I think she means it, really, really means it. Right? So here's an 8-line poem on tension. Have you ever heard this?
No, not this one, no.
Tension. Thoughts create all our bad feelings. Wow. That's not what I thought for 41 years. I thought it was what that son of a bitch just said to me, or what that person just did to me.
Yeah.
Thoughts create all our bad feelings. If we don't know of this fact, we begin to treat our feelings real. and to them we react. Then soon it's not the task at hand that's getting our attention. Instead, we wrestle with each thought, and that creates our tension.
That's brilliant. I'm so pleased you read that. That's really, really great.
It just that this whole book just came to her. I said, Susan, where's this coming? What's going on here? She said, Bill, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? She said, I'm not writing this. I said, what do you mean you're not writing? This was 1984. We had just met Sid about 6 months before. We were kind of looking into the principles. I said, what do you mean, honey, that you're not writing this? She said, I'm telling you, I do not know what's going to come on the paper until it takes form.
Wow.
Quiet, when I define it, means a total lack of sound. A moment without movement. A stillness all around. Quiet, when I feel it, has a different quality. It's a full and peaceful presence permeating all of me.
Oh, gosh, that's so lovely. And I know your time's up, so I want to be...
No, I've still, unless you want to stop, I've still got about 7 or 8 minutes.
Oh, have you? Oh, I was thinking I've got like 2 minutes.
No.
No, please carry on, because...
Did you have I have a couple of things, but did you have a question or anything that you want me to? I've still got another 8 or 9 minutes. Yeah.
The only thing that I would really love you to speak to, and it might be that yours is better, but I was really interested in the neuroplasticity and how hopeful it is, I guess, that we can change.
Sure.
So when people are chronic, well, I tend to work with people who have anxiety and habits of behavior.
Sure.
So,
Well, yeah, I can talk to the neuroplasticity and to the neuroscience. I'll speak to the first thing first. People say, and there's even learned people saying trauma injures your brain. Well, if you're hit with a ball bat, it injures your brain. It injures the computer. But being traumatized by abuse does not, it has no power. It's an event. It has to be done by our thinking, innocently, getting caught up in our thoughts about that. And to the degree that that's true, the people say, well, you hold your traumatic event in your body. As long as you see it as traumatic, you'll hold it in your body, and it'll cause problems.
Yeah.
That's why that study that shows that forgiveness of self and others totally obliterates, because that person that reaches that state of understanding where they see forgiveness just because they see psychological innocence, they see that only hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. Only, people don't realize this stuff about bullying. The incidence of the rate of suicide and depression among bulliers is the same as those who are bullied. They're two people experiencing pain via their thinking, and they think it's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah. So
neuroplasticity, as we learn to live in a healthier and healthier, quieter state of mind, like Mr. Banks says, we all get, it's natural to get viruses, psychological viruses, where we get caught up in some thought, some memory. To the degree that we understand that we also have a virus detector, our feeling level. And our feeling level lets us know when to leave our thinking alone until we feel better. To me, in an upset state of mind, when I lose a loving, lighthearted feeling, let's just say when I get into an upset feeling, it's an early stage of understanding. If I'm upset, it doesn't matter whether I'm upset by worry or anger or guilt or resentment or whatever. To the degree I am upset, I am 5 feet underwater with a 3-foot snorkel. And to take my thinking seriously in 5 feet underwater with a 3-foot snorkel, upset, it would have as much value and have the result as if I take a deep breath through that snorkel.
That's a really lovely, that's a brilliant way of putting that. Yeah, because
it's not 70-30 or 60-40. Hell, if it was 70-30, I might go for it every once in a while. It's 100-0, Charlie. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that the only thought to take seriously when I was in an upset state of mind was the thought that said, leave your thinking alone until you feel better. And remember that God gave you one mouth and 2 ears. So it's better to keep your mouth shut unless you really know what you're talking about, and sit on your. I had a young boy when he had ADHD, and he would always act impulsively and get in trouble. And he said, well, Dr. Pettit, don't you get angry? And I said, well, Joey, I have angry thoughts sometimes. They're like a thought thunderstorm. He said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I said, do you know what duct tape is? And he said, well, yeah, it's that tape they put on pipes when they're leaking, that gray tape. I said, yeah, I carry a roll of that in my pocket at all times. He said, well, what do you do with it? I said, when I'm really upset, I rip a piece off and I put it in my mouth so I don't say anything stupid. And then I sit on my hands so I don't do anything stupid. And then gradually I try to let my hands out, but if my hand out, I put it back there until I, and finally I get to where I can take my tape off and I can get my hands out. And then in a different state of mind, I go and see what, from a place of courage, from the heart, what I might be able to do about the situation. It's not that I become a doormat. It's not that I don't do anything when I see injustice, but I don't do it from an angry state or from a fearful state. Now, if I've got a child running into the street, I don't see what mood I'm in.
No. You
just get there and you do what you do. But otherwise, 99% of the time when I'm upset, I'll give you a quick, I think, example to end with, if it's okay.
Of course.
Mr. Banks is often quoted as saying, and I haven't found this yet, and I've listened to a lot of I'm going to listen to his old audio tapes, that he's often quoted as saying, but it sounds like something he would say, and it makes sense, that if people were just not afraid of their experience, the world would change. Okay. Now, what's behind that? What's behind that is people know that the only experience they can have is a thought-created experience, number one. And that if they leave their thinking alone, it will pass. Even the physiological effects of those thoughts will pass within 5 minutes. That's the physiology.
Okay.
And that their default setting is mental well-being. Everybody's is. Mental well-being is like a huge 50-pound cork. If you had a 50-pound cork, would it not take a lot of energy to push it under the water?
Yes.
It would. It would be exhausting, and you'd get chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yes.
But as soon as you let go of the heavy thinking, of the distorted, just let go of any content of thinking that takes away your lighthearted feelings, what's that cork going to do? Are you going to have to call in some construction company to get the cork to the surface? What? No, it's going to go back home. So here's the story. This man is a friend of mine, and he has no problem with me telling his name. His name is Ofer. In Israel, I went to Israel in 2008, and we started with 27 combat injured soldiers with PTSD from the Lebanon wars. They now have over 1,000. It's called Brothers for Life, 11 years later. He lost all 9 of his company were killed. He was the medic. He tried to save one by one of those that weren't killed immediately in a rocket attack or explosion. as his eyeball was hanging out because he lost his eye, but he was not injured, his brain or his internal organs. All 9 of them died. He went into a terrible depression, terrible PTSD. When me and Rabbi Chaim Levine came there in 2008, he was part of the early movement. He started to see the principles over time. He got well enough. He went back got his degree in psychology. He's in a 2-year internship in child and adolescent psychology in Israel. Now 11 years later, he's doing well. He's got a beautiful relationship, et cetera, et cetera. But he goes with 2 friends, he goes to Barcelona for his holiday just a few months ago. He walks out of the building. He doesn't know that it's a national holiday. Fireworks, explosions, things going off in the air. Now, we have a system that is very fast, but it's inaccurate. It's why policemen sometimes put 5 bullets in somebody's chest because they misinterpret an iPhone for a pistol. Because they're scared. They're frightened. Now, his body thinks, his brain thinks that there's another rocket attack that he lost his 9 friends in. His heart's going 160. His breathing, he's like this, and he's profusely sweating, right? Now, people without understanding, Francis, I don't know why I want to call you Francis, Charli. I don't know. I'll have to figure that out later or see what comes to me. Charli, that person, a person that doesn't have understanding to take to that experience would be frightened by it, wouldn't they? And they would try to do something with their intellect to get away from it, to do something. Not Ofer knows. He has understanding. He knows how the system works. He knows that every single experience is a compound of mind, thought, and consciousness. He knows that it'll pass. He knows the default setting is mental well-being. He said, Bill, I didn't even have to think about it. I just sat on the curb quietly. And I let my brain do what it was doing until it got tired of doing it. And within 5 minutes, my heart rate was totally normal. My breathing was totally normal. I was no longer sweating. And not only that, remember the cork? Yeah. I felt a profound level of calm. And I looked up at the fireworks and I says, is this cool or what? He and his friends did not have to take the next plane back to Tel Aviv. They went and had a wonderful weekend in Barcelona because he was not frightened by his experience, and he knows that his essence is pure mental well-being.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
There's so much hope. There's so much hope there.
Yes, there is.
So, my time is up, isn't it?
Was this okay?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to press the stop record, but I just want to say to everybody who's listening, everyone who's watching, thank you. Can you just tell the name of your website for everything?
It's www, maybe you can, doctors, D-R-S, Pettit, Pettit.com, thedoctorspettit.com.
I'm going to put that in the show notes because you've also got a course coming up in February.
Starting in March 3rd for 8 successive Tuesdays, and it's called Why Understanding Mind, Why Understanding the Principles, but why understanding mind is vital to your physical, emotional well-being. So many times the alarm systems are physical, and then people, instead of seeing that because they don't understand it, they get frightened by their physical experience, and they get in a cycle of terrible emotional and physical discomfort. So yeah, it's called the mind-brain-body connection.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to taking it.
Okay, good.
So I'll put everything in the show notes, and yeah, I hope you get some people on there. But I really appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge and your sharing and your stories and all of it, and you. So thank you so much.
You're very, very, very welcome. It's been a joy. It really has. It's been a joy.
Thank you.
You take care.